"Let's make it interesting," Edward Hayes announced, rapping the Ludo dice against his cufflinks like a gavel. He didn't look at the boy, just pointed. "You, sit. If the Maid's kid wins, I'll make a nice donation to public schools or whatever. But if he loses..." Hayes's grin grew crueler. "Clara scrubs the ballroom floor. Tonight, on livestream. For charity." Laughter erupted. Glasses clinked. Phones rose. In the glow of a chandelier worth more than Clara's annual salary, her 10-year-old son Amari climbed into the oversized leather chair. His feet didn't touch the floor. The penthouse in Atlanta's Buckhead district sparkled with wealth. Walnut-paneled walls, velvet curtains, crystal tumblers sweating aged bourbon. The skyline beyond the glass glowed like molten gold. Around the Ludo table sat the city's elite. Men in midnight suits with teeth too white. Too many rings. Too much confidence. They laughed like they already knew the outcome. Hayes leaned in, speaking slow and syrupy for the cameras. "Roll the dice, champ. Show the room why some people wipe the table and others sit at it." Amari didn't flinch. He sat still, hands folded politely, a statue in a pale shirt. His gaze skimmed the board, then the players. Not fear, assessment. As if the board were a map, and he was already plotting every trap, every escape route. The room saw a joke. Clara's son. A quiet little boy pulled into a rich man's game. But under his calm stare lived Evelyn Johnson's blood, a corner store clerk who taught probability like scripture, strategy like survival. They didn't know Amari had been raised at a Formica kitchen table where beans taught expected value and thumbtacks became decision trees. They didn't know that Grandma Evelyn once said, "Map the room, not the game," and that her words lived behind his every blink. What they saw was a kid about to be embarrassed. What they got was the beginning of their own unraveling. Have you ever watched a room forget how to laugh? Have you seen a child dismantle a kingdom with a six-sided die? You're about to. That night was supposed to be nothing. A post-merger celebration, a round of Ludo between billionaires and bankers, a cruel palate cleanser before cigars and closing speeches. Hayes had laughed when he picked the boy. "We're calling this community outreach." But when Amari rolled his first six and moved with surgical calm, the first shiver of silence crept into the room. They had no idea what had just begun. The red pawn slid forward 2 spaces. A modest move, unremarkable, enough to earn a scoff from one of the investment bankers flanking the table. "Could have taken blue right there," he said, smirking over the rim of his whiskey glass. Hayes chuckled without looking up. "Give the boy a break. He's trying." But Amari wasn't trying. He was calculating. His eyes tracked the board not like a child playing Ludo, but like a codebreaker reading a cipher. His lips didn't move, but the slight rhythm of his fingertips against his thigh suggested counting, cadence, timing, probability. When a guest reached for his dice, Amari blinked slowly, watching the angle of the wrist, the tension in the grip. Small details. Evelyn would have called them tells. Map the room, not just the board. The words whispered through his mind like a ghost walking beside him. He remembered the string. "Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family." If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Evelyn Johnson's kitchen had smelled like lemon soap and warm beans. The walls were yellowed, the linoleum cracked, but to Amari it had been a command center, the battleground of his first strategies. Evelyn would push aside the soup pot and pin colored yarn between thumbtacks stuck in the wall, looping decision trees like constellations. "Where you are," she'd say, tapping a point. "Where you could go. Where you shouldn't." Jam jars filled with pinto beans clinked with each lesson. "Probability," she'd say, shaking them. "Most folks call it luck. But it's just odds hiding in plain sight." He hadn't understood at first. Not fully. But she'd made games out of everything. Groceries, weather, the clatter of cars outside. The dice don't care if you're rich. But people do. So read them, not the game. Back in the penthouse, one of the men leaned close. A junior banker, red-faced and eager. "You sure about that move, champ?" he said, grinning like he was helping. "You had a chance to take green last turn. Should have hit him while you had the roll." Amari smiled, small and patient, and moved his yellow pawn 1 space. Deliberately, unimpressively, another ripple of laughter spread across the table. They didn't see the trap. 2 turns later, the room gasped as Amari rolled a 6-5 combo and vaulted a red token across the board. A double capture followed by a quick slide into the safe zone. The green player's mouth fell open. "What the?" Hayes' grin faltered. He leaned forward slightly now, elbows on the felt. His next throw landed too hard. The dice bounced against the padded edge and scattered. 6. Of course, Amari didn't react, but he noted the grip tighter, the arm tense. The pitch of Hayes' voice just a notch higher than before. Anger equals force. Force equals higher throws. Evelyn would have called it the energy tax. Emotion costs information, she used to say. If they're mad, they leak. Across the room, Clara stood stiff at the doorway, tray in her hands, eyes fixed on her son. Her fingers trembled slightly, the same way they had on Evelyn's last day in the hospital. Amari had seen it then, too. Fear dressed in dignity. He didn't look back at her, but he straightened his spine just a little more, moved with more precision. Let his next move land quietly but confidently, like punctuation. She saw it. The tremor faded. The banker who'd offered advice earlier leaned to whisper something to Hayes, but the billionaire waved him off, eyes locked on the board. His smile had flattened. Near the bar, a man in a charcoal suit tapped his phone screen and started recording. Just a short clip, barely 10 seconds. A child shifting tokens with uncanny intent, surrounded by millionaires pretending not to lean forward. The man titled the video, Ludo at the Lair. He didn't expect anyone to see it, but within moments, comments began to appear. That kid's kinda cold. Wait, why does he look like he's planning a coup? Rewatching. He baited that banker, didn't he? Phone stayed up. The laughter softened. And Amari? He didn't smile. He just adjusted a pawn and waited because Evelyn had taught him well. The game doesn't start when the dice roll. It starts when they stop laughing. "Hi," Amari murmured as the dice cup passed to the man on his left. The banker laughed, the forced kind that tastes nervous. "We'll see, kid." He shook, rolled, 5 and 6. High. A few chuckles bubbled at the table, but they didn't stick. "Next roll. Middle," Amari said. 4 and 3. Middle again. Repeat. The dice landed. A 3. Again. By the 5th call, high. And another 6 dropped onto the green felt. Nobody laughed. A few players exchanged glances. One of them slowly set his glass down. Hayes watched with narrowed eyes, the corners of his mouth stiff. His hand hovered above the dice like he was holding a weapon, not a game piece. "That's a neat trick," Hayes said, tossing the cup between his fingers. "But you're not psychic, kid. Just lucky." Amari didn't reply. He wasn't looking at the dice anymore. He was watching Hayes' posture, tracking every twitch, every flex of the fingers, every spike in breath. Evelyn had called it listening without ears. Hayes rolled. 6. He blinked down at it. "You always roll high when you're angry," Amari said softly. The air flattened. A slow, tight laugh spread across the table, tight like a lid on a boiling pot. Someone coughed. Someone else checked their phone. That's when Hayes leaned back and said too casually, "Let's spice this up. House rules. Double capture on the home lane." The guests shifted. One even raised a brow. That was a serious change. Hayes smiled at Amari as if expecting protest. Amari only nodded. "Okay," he recalculated. "That's simple." Not a single pause. 2 turns later, he used the new rule to bait Hayes' green token into an early advance. Then he split his red lane, sending one pawn wide and tucking another behind Hayes' unguarded flank. The fork was subtle, efficient, lethal. Hayes moved forward and walked straight into it. The room tilted. You could feel it, the mood sliding from amusement to realization. A hedge fund partner stopped sipping his scotch. A sports agent, arms folded in what was supposed to be casual arrogance, quietly pocketed his last betting chip. Across the room, Clara exhaled through her nose. Her fingers tightened on the tray, and for a moment she wasn't in the penthouse. She was back in a hospital room where machines beeped softly and Evelyn Johnson lay in a bed that looked too big for her. "Don't raise him to be afraid," Evelyn had whispered that night. "Raise him to read the room. If they won't make space for him, he'll make it." She'd squeezed Clara's hand. "Don't let this world shrink him to fit." Clara blinked hard and looked back at her son. So small in the chair, so still, so calm. But his eyes moved with purpose. He wasn't playing anymore. He was solving. Amari picked up the dice, rolled a 6, moved a pawn forward, then paused and rerouted it backward 1 square. Laughter returned, but it was confused, brittle. "Kid doesn't know what he's doing now," someone muttered, but Amari did. He was staggering his tokens, setting up a parity trap. Each token's placement is mathematically designed to require impossible roll combinations to block. He rolled again, another 6, and didn't use it to attack. He let it burn. A waste 6. Only it wasn't wasted. It was tempo control. A guest near the bar leaned toward the man filming on his phone. "Are you still recording?" The guy nodded, barely breathing. The viewer count ticked past 100,000. Ludo lesson trended within minutes. Let him finish wasn't far behind. Hayes stared at the board like it had betrayed him. He shifted in his chair, forced a smile, and said, "All right, enough warm-up." He pushed the dice toward Amari. New stakes. The room looked up. "If you lose, kid, you apologize to the room. For wasting our time. For pretending to be something you're not." Silence gripped the space between them. Amari looked at the board, then at the dice, then his eyes flicked toward Clara. Just for a breath. A heartbeat. She didn't move, didn't nod, didn't speak. But he turned back, eyes clear. "I won't," he whispered, and rolled. The dice whispered against the felt, soft as breath. A 5. Amari moved a blue token forward. 1 square. He didn't speak, didn't react, just shifted the piece, hands precise, eyes calm. Hayes scoffed. "Are you planning to win this by playing scared?" Amari didn't answer. Another guest, emboldened by the billionaire's taunt, leaned forward. "Come on, champ. You got lucky earlier. Time to move like you mean it." Still, no reply. Amari gave a small, polite nod. That was all. It unnerved them more than any comeback could have. The table of tailored men, deal makers and empire builders, guys who didn't hear no from anyone but lawyers, suddenly couldn't get a 10-year-old to react. So they pushed harder. One banker slammed down a chip beside the board. "Bet he folds in 2 turns." "He's not folding," someone muttered. Amari's silence wasn't uncertainty. It was strategy. The same way Evelyn had taught him not to rush when a pattern changed. "Quiet is a knife," she'd once said, threading yarn between 2 thumbtacks. "People cut themselves on it when they don't know what it's for." At the table, Amari's pawns spread in slow, methodical motion, not clustered, not random, staggered, positioned like chess sentries, creating zones of control that forced his opponents to chase him across distances requiring specific roll combinations. Most couldn't see it, but the traps were already laid. They just hadn't been triggered yet. Dice passed. "Low," Amari said. The man laughed, rolled one. Heads turned. Hayes exhaled sharply. Clara, from her corner by the door, stood straighter. She hadn't moved for the last 20 minutes, except for the tight knot her fingers made at her apron hem. Her eyes stayed fixed on her son. She didn't understand the mechanics of Ludo the way Evelyn did, but she understood people, and the way these men shifted in their seats told her everything she needed to know. They were losing. Amari rolled again. A 6. He didn't go for the easy attack. He redirected, sliding a yellow pawn into a position that looked vulnerable, but wasn't. Hayes saw it as a weakness. "He's panicking," he muttered. Then he grinned. "Let's see how he handles pressure." He rolled, got a 4. Not enough. His jaw tightened. Across the table, the dice cup passed hands. Leather brushing felt. A soft click. A ring tapped against the crystal. Breath hitched just before a roll. Amari's eyes caught all of it. He read the room like Evelyn once read weather. Heat in the air, pressure in the bones. He had just learned the banker on his left rolled faster when bluffing. That another exhaled before every high roll. That Hayes gripped tighter after bad throws, forcing the dice, trying to command them. The room thought they were watching a child. Amari was conducting an audit. Then Hayes caught him. One of Amari's pawns. Cornered. No way out, no safety zone in reach. "Gotcha," Hayes said, loud enough to turn heads. "Even quiet kids bleed." He rolled. 6. Moved. "Let's see what you do now." Amari leaned forward, picked up the dice. No flair, no smile, just a smooth, silent roll. 6. He rolled again. 5. A murmur ran through the room. He slid a red pawn forward, straight past Hayes's token, then turned, flanked a blue piece, chained into a yellow capture, and dropped a final pawn into the home lane with surgical precision. 3 captures, 1 sequence. Hayes stared. A guest's partner, quiet until now, whispered, "Edward, maybe stop," but he couldn't. The game wasn't the prize anymore. His reputation was. The stream cracked 250,000 viewers. A math coach from Savannah commented, "He's manipulating parity and tempo. This isn't luck. It's predictive control." Hayes gripped the dice like they owed him something. His knuckles whitened. "Roll," he muttered to himself. "Come on." Amari watched. "You roll 6s when you're angry," he said gently. The words didn't land like a challenge. They floated across the table like a breeze before a storm. Hayes slammed the dice. They spun, clattered, landed. 6. The room inhaled at once, sharp, collective. Nobody laughed. The 6 still sat on the felt, defiant and perfect, as if the dice had heard Amari's quiet prophecy and obeyed. Hayes stared at it for too long. Around the table, no one moved. A glass clinked somewhere. The chandelier hummed above them like distant static. Amari's fingers moved first, not toward Hayes, not toward the tension boiling across the green felt battlefield, toward the latter. 3 of his tokens were staggered across the board like rungs, placed with such unnerving symmetry that only a handful of people in the room understood what it meant. If any high number dropped in the next 3 turns, 6, 5, even a 4, he could run them home in perfect sequence. It wasn't luck. It was a ladder sprint. A map, made in motion. Hayes didn't see it. Not yet. He saw only the red pawn closest to his own green token, the one Amari had mistakenly left exposed near the center lane. He smiled like a man handed mercy. "There you are," he muttered, voice low with triumph. He chased, moved off formation, shifted his attention away from his safest route, away from his own backline. The trap closed behind him. Amari's next roll, 5. A red token shot forward to the next rung. A yellow crept into flanking range. The board tilted, but Hayes still didn't see it. He was so focused on the chase, so focused on punishing the child, that he didn't realize the only piece worth protecting was already exposed. "Almost there," Hayes said under his breath. He rolled. 3. Not enough. Amari looked at the dice cup in front of him like a musician picking up a familiar instrument. Clara held her breath from the back of the room. Not from fear. She hadn't felt that since Amari's first 6, but from something deeper, something older. Recognition. He rolled. 6. The red token advanced to the penultimate square, 1 away from home. Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Still just beginner's luck," he said. The words were dry now, stripped of confidence. Amari picked up the cup again. Rolled. 4. The yellow token reached its launch point. The dealer guest leaned in, eyes wide, whispering, "He's sequencing." Hayes moved again, fast, aggressive. The exposed token struck down Amari's decoy pawn. "Finally!" he hissed. "Off the board." Amari didn't flinch. He rolled once more. 5. The third token landed behind Hayes's last viable piece, his lead runner. Only then did Hayes look up and realize what was happening. "You've been—" He paused. The final roll came, slow and inevitable. Dice turning mid-air, spinning over velvet. The room leaned in. 3. Not enough to catch Amari's real path, but just enough to land him on Hayes's square. He reached forward, slid his red token onto the green one. Capture. And then, in one clean motion, Amari tipped the token forward into the home lane. A small click. The sound of checkmate. Silence. Hayes sat back slowly, eyes locked on the board like he could rewrite it just by staring. He forced a dry chuckle. Well, beginner's luck, right? But the dealer, older, quiet until now, leaned forward and said, "That wasn't luck." He turned to the table. That was deliberate probability control. He staggered his tokens for optimal advance. Watch your rolls. Build tempo off your aggression. Hayes opened his mouth to respond, but the noise in the room was no longer in his control. Phones were up. The stream had cracked 1 million. Clips were already being replayed. Amari's soft prediction, Hayes' slam, the 6, the triple capture, the final quiet slide into home. Clara hadn't moved from the wall, but her shoulders rose, not with pride, with clarity, with something Evelyn had once promised would come. The moment the world saw her son as he truly was. Not cute, not clever, genius. She didn't clap, didn't cheer. She simply stood taller. Hayes' jaw tensed. His smile twitched, then collapsed. He turned toward Clara, voice low but sharp. This is a breach of discretion. You brought him in here, and now there are recordings. My legal team, sir. One of his senior counsel stepped forward, phone in hand. He turned the screen toward Hayes. Sir, he said again, quieter. This is already everywhere. By sunrise, the world had already named it. The Ludo lesson. Every major morning show rolled out the same split screen. On one side, Edward Hayes' confident sneer under chandelier light. On the other hand, Amari, calm, still quiet, saying softly, "You roll 6s when you're angry." Clips of the final sequence looped on every platform. The decoy, the capture, the slide into home. Millions watched. Then millions more. By noon, the stream had passed 5.6 million views. Hashtags flooded. Her Ludo lesson. Her let him finish. Amari maps. Panelists debated it like politics. What does this say about gatekeeping and genius? Is this a story about race? Class? The education system? Others were blunter. Edward Hayes tried to humiliate a child, one host said on live television, and ended up proving just how small his billion-dollar world really is. The consequences came faster than anyone expected. By midday, 3 of Hayes' event sponsors had withdrawn from his upcoming gala, citing conflicting values. That night, the Midtown Literacy Trust issued a statement that it had unanimously voted to remove Hayes from their board after internal emails leaked. Emails referring to the stunt as PR gold with a soft edge and Amari as a cute poverty pawn. There was nothing soft about the fallout. News vans lined the curb of Clara Johnson's apartment complex, angled for shots of the boy genius. Drones hovered just beyond legal distance. Paparazzi camped near the school gate. Neighbors whispered in the hallways. Some offered congratulations. Others just watched, unsure what to say. Clara refused every interview for 3 days. On the 4th, she opened the door and gave one. Her terms, her place, her voice. It was filmed in the break room of the community center where Evelyn used to volunteer. Fluorescent lighting, cracked tile floor, a vending machine humming softly in the background. "I don't want apologies," Clara said, sitting straight in her navy sweater, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "I don't need promises from people who now want to be on our side because it's trending. What we need, what children like my son need, is access." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flyer. The Evelyn Johnson Foundation. It wasn't just a name. It was a blueprint. Microgrants for logic clubs. Travel stipends for academic competitions. Scholarships to cover test fees and transportation and hot meals so Brilliance wasn't left to starve in silence. "This is about structure," Clara said, "not a spectacle." The video reached 2 million views by evening. A university in Massachusetts extended a mentorship offer. A tech firm in San Francisco sent a scholarship to its elite statistics summer camp. Invitations poured in, from nonprofits, educators, even government officials. But the one that made Amari's eyes light up came by mail, printed on thick cardstock. The State Math Olympiad Committee formally invites Amari Johnson to compete at the 2026 Invitational. He didn't say much when he read it, just held the envelope quietly, like it was heavier than it looked. Across town, Edward Hayes faced a row of cameras under colder light. His press conference was short. His voice wavered. Every attempt to reframe the moment as a learning experience came off as hollow. When asked if he planned to apologize directly, he answered with a pause so long the room shifted, but it was the final question that sealed his undoing. A reporter leaned forward, microphone steady. "Mr. Hayes, when did you first realize a 10-year-old was outplaying you?" The room waited. The pause was longer than any answer. Amari watched the clip from the kitchen table while Clara made tea. He didn't smile, just studied Hayes' silence like he'd studied the dice. He hadn't returned to school yet. Not because he didn't want to, but because every hallway had become a theater. Even his teachers stumbled over his name now, like they were afraid of saying it wrong. He hadn't touched the Ludo board in days. "I didn't mean for it to be a thing," he said quietly, stirring his tea. Clara didn't answer right away. That afternoon, she took him to the cemetery. It was cool under the magnolia trees. The wind moved gently through the branches, carrying the scent of rain from far off. They stood before a stone etched with love and years and a name that never left their mouths long. Evelyn Johnson, 1954 to 2022. Clara rested a hand on Amari's shoulder. "You don't have to be loud to be seen," she said. "You don't have to explain yourself to people who never asked to know you until you made the world pause." He looked down. She squeezed his shoulder. "We walk into rooms with our own light," she said. "We always have." He didn't answer, but when he left, he carried himself differently, like he remembered the map again. The gym smelled like floor polish and nervous energy. Beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights, rows of folding chairs lined the polished wood floor of the Georgia Youth Logic Invitational. Kids in pressed polos and mismatched blazers hunched over logic puzzles, dice towers, and abstract strategy boards. A cluster of parents whispered from the bleachers, coffee cups clutched like anchors. Amari sat near the center, quiet, focused, his thrifted navy blazer a size too big, but worn like armor. Around his wrist, Evelyn's silver bracelet gleamed softly, dull in the gym lights, but unmistakably present. The final puzzle was projected onto a screen above the judges' table, a multi-piece parity trap, layered with movement constraints and non-obvious win conditions. The room leaned in. Even the proctors furrowed their brows. Amari read it once, then again, then picked up his pencil and started marking possibilities, discarding the wrong ones like falling dominoes until only one path remained. He tapped his solution card, slid it forward, and leaned back in his chair. 10 minutes later, the buzzer sounded. The judges reviewed the entries. One by one, they nodded. When they read the results aloud, Amari didn't smile. He just looked down at his card, proof of what he already knew. First place. He walked to the podium in the same quiet rhythm he'd carried into Edward Hayes's penthouse months ago. Cameras flashed. A woman from a local news station tried to get a quote, but he only nodded politely. Clara watched from the stands, her hands folded neatly in her lap. This time there were no clenched fists. No tight smiles, just breathe. That evening, the community center buzzed like a hive. Folding tables had been replaced with whiteboards, hex grids, stacks of pawns, and dice in clear containers. Some kids argued over probability trees. Others leaned into collaborative puzzles with pencil-stained fingers and furrowed brows. A sign above the entrance read, "Logic and Ludo Lab, powered by the Evelyn Johnson Foundation." Below it, a mural spanned the back wall. Evelyn, painted in tones of dusk gold and quiet strength, smiling down at a kitchen table filled with beans in glass jars and string winding between pushpins. The quote beside her read, "Luck is just a room most people enter without a map." They'd painted it word for word from Amari's memory. The lab welcomed kids from every corner of the city, zip codes that rarely overlapped in schools or libraries. Here they came to play, to think, to test theories in themselves. The Foundation's first annual report came out that same week. It didn't brag. No glossy headlines. Just clean numbers and small victories. Tournament entry fees covered, coined. Bus vouchers issued, and schools now run weekly logic clubs with snacks and space. New laptops donated. Kid, previously suspended for daydreaming too much, now tutoring 3 others in basic probability. Structure, not spectacle. Clara found herself walking more slowly these days, not from fatigue, but from freedom. She no longer rehearsed what to say to strangers. Didn't worry about being invisible or too visible. In the quiet moments between the whirlwind, she and Amari returned to old rhythms. Sunday nights, they cooked Evelyn's beans, just like always, counting by twos, sorting spices by memory, not recipe. Amari would narrate equations mid-stir. Clara would laugh and correct his posture while he diced. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about not shrinking. Across town, in a glass office with a view of the skyline, Edward Hayes sat behind a walnut desk with too many empty frames. One sat face down, the headline visible through the edge of the glass. The Ludo lesson, how a child strategist exposed a billionaire's arrogance. Next to it sat a smaller frame, upright. Inside, a thank you card with a crayon drawing, a child holding a medal. The handwriting read, "Thank you for the scholarship. I want to be a mathematician now." Hayes didn't sign checks with his name anymore. The new foundation's contributions came quietly. No press, no ceremonies. Just payments marked anonymous. Everyone thought it was guilt. It wasn't. It was recognition. His penance was finally understanding what it meant to open a door instead of standing in front of one. One Thursday afternoon, as the sun poured through the community center windows and dust floated in golden threads, Amari knelt beside a first grader frozen over a Ludo board. The younger child frowned at the tokens, stuck between two paths and unsure which to take. Amari watched for a moment, then leaned closer. "Watch the lanes," he said softly. Tapping one with his finger, the boy looked up. "Then choose the future you want." The child nodded and reached forward. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent and immense. But inside this small room filled with logic, laughter, and second chances, a brighter light had replaced the chandelier of that cruel night, and the map, Evelyn's map, was still unfolding. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.